that.
Yes.
Yeah. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the eConnect series this morning. Yes, we have had a 3-week break, but we are going to really pep you up today, thanks to Mr. Sanjay Pinto. Welcome, Sanjay. Thank you very much for accepting immediately to speak to us. He is a man of multitude talents. I don't know what all he does. In fact, I will leave it to Harsha to speak about him. There's nothing he doesn't do except that probably he just missed the military part of it. But he's very happy to interact with the military. Sanjay, you're going to talk to us on a very crucial subject which haunts us every evening on any channel that we switch on. It's live, it's very important, it's very pertinent. And I hope you will take us through all that noise which is created and make some sense out of what is going on our media channels. Welcome, Sanjay. Thank you for accepting our invitation. It is our honor to host you. I will now hand you over to Wing Commander Harsha Vardhan, our secretary, to introduce you.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to welcome Mr. Sanjay Pinto on this morning's talk show, which all of us have been very, very eagerly waiting for. Now, before we hand over the mic to Mr. Sanjay Pinto, I would just like to make a small introduction about him. Mr. Sanjay Pinto is a practicing advocate in Madras High Court, where he specializes in media, criminal, constitutional, corporate, arbitration, and consumer cases. Before donning the black gown, he was the resident editor of NDTV 24/7 and the executive editor of NDTV Hindu. He is also a former national debating champion with a record 106 victories in intercollegiate debates. Sanjay wears many hats. Amongst them are, he is the legal columnist of Deccan Chronicle, and till date, he has published over 234 legal columns. He is a panelist on national TV debates. He is also, to his credit, he has also authored 3 books: My NDTV Days, Justice for All, and Speakers Are Made, Not Born. He represented India in the IVLP program on the rule of law and judicial reforms in the USA in 2014. He is a guest lecturer at many law schools. Sanjay is a total Chennai Vasi. He was the best outgoing student of Don Bosco Egmore and Loyola College. And while he was in his law college, he was the national debating champion. He is married to Vidya, who is a former TV journalist and a former college lecturer. And they are blessed with 9-year-old twins. Sanjay has achieved so much in such a short time, and he is only 46 years old. I think he is one of the youngest speakers we have had in our eConnect programs. With that introduction, I now hand you over to Mr. Sanjay Pinto. All yours, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. And I salute all the national heroes. I am completely in awe of your contribution to the nation. I may not have had the privilege of serving in the armed forces. Regrettably, nobody in my family had joined the armed forces, but I must tell you that I had a passion for the uniform. I had a fascination for the uniform throughout my school life. I wrote the civil services exam in 95 and 96. I was absolutely passionate about joining the Indian Police Service. But God had other plans, and there I am. But of course, the passion for the uniform continues, because now as a lawyer, I end up wearing the gown. So that's also part of the uniform. Thank you for having me. I'm humbled and honored, especially grateful to Wing Commander Vartaman and Dr. Shobha Vartaman for being instrumental in having me address this very dignified and a very respectable association. Socrates, the Greek philosopher, ladies and gentlemen, had propounded what he called the triple filter test. Is it good? Is it true? Is it useful? Now, I wonder how many TV channels today, how many news organizations today would come anywhere near passing that Socrates triple filter test today, with all that screaming and shouting that we hear every night, throughout the day, in fact, 24/7. But then that's an old definition of news. The current definition of news is that news is what someone wants suppressed somewhere. Everything else is public relations. Now, these, ladies and gentlemen, are two extremes. But that said and done, today, as viewers, as consumers of news, in the court of public opinion, prime-time television anchors, social media influencers, print and digital journalists can play judges, the jury, and even executioners in sensational cases. The accused can become victims, and victims can be hounded as accused. And we see that with several sensational cases day in and day out. Ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental canon of criminal jurisprudence is the presumption of innocence. And this fundamental canon is often turned on its head night after night. The presumption here is invariably of guilt. There are spliced statements. There are allegations of the tutu meme, he said, she said variety. There are hashtags and trends which are treated as evidence. No comments can be construed as a sign of guilt. A well thought out and a vetted response can be interpreted as damage control. This is a fact. So let's for a moment traverse to, beyond, before the advent of the electronic media, before the Contempt of Courts Act came into being, before obviously the social media existed. What role, what view did the courts take of trial by the media? The Supreme Court, in a landmark judgment, Saibal Kumar Gupta versus B.K. Sen, had observed that it would be mischievous, that's the term the Supreme Court used, it would be mischievous for a newspaper, because those days were only newspapers, for a newspaper to systematically conduct an independent investigation. Later, the Punjab High Court in Rao Haniranen Singh versus Gumani Ram Arya was more scathing in its view that the liberty of the press is subordinate to the proper administration of justice. The court said that the duty, the plain duty of a journalist is reporting and not adjudication of cases. To some extent, I agree. To some extent, I disagree. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we do know that times have changed. Investigative journalism is a reality today. But for a vigilant media, many scams in this country would have been swept under the carpet. The media, as one of the four estates in the democracy, is a watchdog. And this watchdog needs to bark, sometimes it needs to bite as well. But that watchdog should not become a bloodhound. And therein lies the problem. Now, this media draws its legitimacy from freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India. And this right to free speech extends to viewers and to readers. But the problem here is what is lost on many sections of the media. I would not say the entire media, there are still saner voices out there. What is lost on many sections of the media is that this fundamental right is not absolute. It is not unbridled. It comes with what the framers of the Constitution thought fit to include as reasonable restrictions under Article 19(2), some of which are, apart from defamation and unity and sovereignty of the country, contempt of court. Now, this really is the heart of the problem, really. There is often a catch and a clash of constitutional safeguards. Ladies and gentlemen, every time a person's guilt is pronounced on live TV or on the social media, someone's right to a fair trial is violated. The right to a fair trial is inherent in Article 21 of the Constitution, which protects personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. Procedure established by law can never be an editorial agenda of a media house. Procedure established by law can never be a trend on the social media. Remember the Supreme Court in a landmark case of Zahira Sheikh versus State of Gujarat in 2006, 14 years ago, was categorical that a fair trial obviously would mean a trial before an impartial judge, a fair prosecutor, and an atmosphere of judicial calm. Note these words, judicial calm. I often wonder whether you can have judicial calm with Obi-Wan standing outside courts, people coming up with non-stop saturation coverage and commentary. That at some level puts pressure on the courts, whether we accept it or not. Every time people are prematurely maligned in the media, their right to reputation is hit. The Supreme Court in Subramanian Swamy versus Union of India, 2016, refused to decriminalize defamation and held that reputation is both a fundamental right as well as a human right. Every time an individual is hauled over the coals in the media, it would be an infringement of Article 22, Clause 2, because that's a punishment twice for the same offense, what we call double jeopardy in law. Every time a person is grilled on TV debates and forced to give these, yes or no replies, it could affect his right under Article 22, Clause 3, as being compelled to be a witness against himself. Of course, although we know that such statements ought not to have any evidentiary value. I must tell you, I have greatly reduced. In fact, I've almost stopped going to these TV debates. I'm quite disenchanted with the format. And the ones that actually have sane debates don't call me because of a policy of not calling ex-employees for whatever reason. And very often when they ask me, they just give me the subject. They don't give me the actual topic. They just give me the subject. And then they ask me for my view. And sometimes they'll say, we'll call you back. So which means if you don't take a view that they want, then they won't call you. I know of panelists who will say, you tell us whatever view you want, we'll take. But my views are not for sale. My views are my views. And showing my face, I'm fed up of showing my face on TV. Showing my face is really not an incentive anymore, not after all these years of TV. But there are panelists who end up doing that. And when you go there, they will have these boxes, so many boxes enough to play, with panelists enough to play a cricket match, 22 panelists sometimes. And they have these false binaries, for or against. There's no middle path there. It's the contrary view. You get labeled, you get boxed literally into one particular view. And then you hardly, if you take a line which doesn't suit the anchor's agenda, they hardly let you speak. So you're like an umpire standing there with your finger up in the air trying to politely suggest, I want to speak. And I don't believe really in people yelling and screaming to make a point. The debate should be dignified. It's anything but that today on many channels today. And don't forget, there are penal provisions on defamation under sections 499 of the and 500 of the IPC. Let's not forget there is a prohibition on disclosure of identity of victims under section 228A of the IPC or children in conflict with law under the Juvenile Justice Act. Don't forget section 2C of the Contempt of Courts Act, which bars acts that cause prejudice or interference with the due course of any judicial proceedings or obstruction of the administration of justice. Don't forget that even under section 81J of the RTI Act, the Right to Information Act, there is an exemption on the disclosure of personal information that has no relationship to any public activity or interest or causes unwanted invasion of privacy, even those holding public office. So I remember when our national hero, Wing Commander Abhinandan Vardhaman, when that incident happened in Pakistan, there were people who absolutely without any common sense went and showed visuals of the parents' home here in Chennai. You're actually compromising their safety. I mean, a large section of the media did not do that, but there were some who did that. Now, that's also, even during 26/11, we saw a blatant violation, in terms of disclosure, of sensitive information which people across the border were watching. Now, here the media needs to take, needs to be fairly patriotic and take a line in national interest. How many of them do that? That's an open question. Let's also not forget that there are international laws on the presumption of innocence under Article 11 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, under Article 14.2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. There is the presumption of innocence, which is completely trampled upon by large sections of the media today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to make this as rather personal sort of account. As a former TV journalist for 15 years, I was a bureau chief of Tamil Nadu, and I was a resident editor. And I also, for about 2 years, I was on deputation heading editorially a local TV channel called NDTV Hindu. I do believe that the media has a right to not just report. I don't agree with the Saibal Kumar judgment of the Supreme Court before the electronic media came into being. Media has a right to not just report, but also to analyze, to interpret, and to investigate happenings in public interest. I think that should be the bottom line, in public interest. At the end of the day, whether the media, whether journalism is a profession or a vocation, that debate will go on. The media needs to work in public interest. Now, remember, there is also protection under the Contempt of Courts Act. People call it a draconian measure, but even that so-called draconian law, under Section 3(1) exempts innocent publication. Under Section 4, it protects fair and accurate reporting of judicial proceedings. So the line must be drawn so that investigation does not stray into adjudication. Let me say this again. Investigation must never stray into adjudication. That should be a strict LOC, a line of control. Investigation cannot stray into adjudication because that is the domain of the courts and the courts alone, period. But it's easier said than done. At webinars, we can wax eloquent on all this. Responsible content, let me tell you, let me confess, this is when all the secrets come out. Responsible content that is not sensational does not attract eyeballs. What attracts eyeballs? Masala. So if Oscar Wilde, ladies and gentlemen, had once quipped, moderation is a fatal thing. Nothing succeeds like excess. A TV anchor once joked, a prominent one, I don't mind a rat race for TRPs if I am the lead rat. So the highest TRPs today, whether we like it or not, are for slanging matches. There is a voyeuristic streak in us. For instance, if while we are participating in this webinar, if outside our homes, if there is some yelling and screaming or some commotion going outside, two people arguing loudly, most of us, I know, our attention will be drawn to that. For some reason, we like to watch people fighting. Most of us at least do. We like to watch that. There is that voyeuristic streak, and 24-hour channels are a monster because feeding them 24/7 is a big challenge, which is why any developing news story is milked till thy kingdom come. It is milked. And let me tell you something else. Why do people have all these regular shows and debate shows and all that? Because it costs less to invite motor mounts, as I call them, to a debate and put a 1-hour show together than to actually commission reporters to travel and do real journalism and pound the pavement. When I started off, in fact, as a little boy, I used to be enamored and in awe of Prannoy Roy's World This Week, where you had stories from across the world, capsuled, news capsules together. So you watch that half an hour of news or 1 hour of news, you will get your entire news that you need to know. Then when the News Tonight started and when NDTV started its 24/7 news channel, we used to have 9 o'clock news where all the reporters, their work would be showcased at the end of the day. So 9 to 9:30, sit down and watch your news. You would get news from across the country. That story-based journalism has been forgotten today because it's all yelling and screaming. It's all I, me, myself, about these anchors who have grown larger than life. And that is at the cost of real journalism. Reporters to travel and do stories cost money. A lot of cost cutting is happening. There's also the concept of mobile journalists, where there's a single journalist who goes, who's a reporter, who's a camera person, who's an engineer, who uplinks, does everything, all roles rolled into one. This is a reality today, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what is the solution? What is the way out of it? One thing is, of course, the remote is in your hand, stop watching news. The other is to watch news like you watch movies. What do you do when you watch movies? You watch movies with a willing suspension of disbelief. So watch TV debates, if you have to, through your own prism of fairness and common sense, and perhaps have a good laugh sometimes because you can't be fooled really by these people, the kind of false pretenses they come up with. It is time for us viewers, we are consumers of news, to be vigilant and not be gullible. We must use our own sense of discretion and balance because you don't find the anchors doing that. Now, there are media regulations and guidelines, if you're wondering, whether it was a Sushant Singh Rajput case or earlier the Sunanda Pushkar case, or those insensitive bathtub reconstruction cases, if you remember when actress Sridevi died. There is a need for self-regulation in the media. There is a need for introspection. Ironically, this Sridevi coverage came close on the heels of a 9-member constitution bench judgment of the Supreme Court, in Justice K.S. Puttasamy versus Union of India, which upheld the right to privacy as a fundamental right. On the one hand, you have the Supreme Court saying right to privacy is a fundamental right, and there you have people, talking about wine glasses and was she drinking before she went into the bathtub, all kinds of things, theories and all going, which is so insensitive. Imagine the plight of the family members who see that. Now, there is something called a News Broadcasters Association, and this came up recently in the Supreme Court when Justice in the Sudarshan TV case, when Justice Chandrachud asked them about self-regulation. And this News Broadcasters Association has its own principles of what they call self-regulation. These were principles framed in 2008. These are to be monitored by a jury of its peers. I'm not sure if they've been updated, but I'm told that they are still valid. What are some of these? I'll give you a slice of some of these. What are some of these rules, these guidelines? One, clause 6. It says, as a rule, channels must not intrude on private lives or personal affairs of individuals unless there is a clearly established and larger identifiable public interest. See, again, public interest comes into being. Unless there's a larger identifiable public interest for such a broadcast. Intrusion of private spaces must not be for salacious interest. That's very clear. Then you have clause 9. I'm just giving you the relevant clauses, just to know that these guidelines exist. Clause 9 is on sting operations. Sting operations should be a last resort, and sex and sleaze must not be allowed as a means to carry out sting operations. Then there must be no deliberate alteration of visuals or editing or interspersing done with any raw footage in a way that alters or misrepresents the truth or presents only a portion of the truth. What happens is when the media makes a big mistake and it's pointed out, they carry the clarification, especially in a newspaper, like a statutory warning on a cigarette pack, very small, inconspicuous thing, the correction. But the actual damage would have been done through a big headline. So there's no, correspondingly, the damage is not really undone. Even reconstruction, they talk about reconstruction like special effects, bathtub, wine glass props to boost ratings, can be interpreted as deliberate alteration of visual. Now, reconstruction, in my opinion, can originate only when there are eyewitnesses. What happens when there's a crime? The police takes the suspects, take them to the scene of crime, make them reconstruct the whole thing just to get an idea. Reconstruction has to be factual. Reconstruction cannot be fictional. On TV channels, you have fictional reconstruction, and there lies the problem. Then comes another, very important aspect, ladies and gentlemen, about public figures. Public figures includes senior officers of the armed forces. Public figures are also entitled to their privacy. There is no question about that. Just because you're a public figure, you don't give up your right to privacy. And the families have a right to grieve in peace. I remember during the Kargil war when I covered, my role was limited because I was really covering stories from Tamil Nadu. And I remember also, I'll give you a small example, it's there in my book, my NDTV days. There was Major Saravanan, who was martyred, who's called the hero of Battalion. I went to Trichy to cover, when he was brought back. And the moment his mother saw me, she burst into tears. And I didn't know what to say. But then when I went back and told my colleague, she said, I should have gone. Because, probably you are more or less in the same age group. You probably reminded her of her son. So those were the days when people were so sensitive. Today, nobody bothers. I was appalled to see people climbing over coffins when those heroes were brought back. Coffins draped in the national tricolor. Where's your sense of upbringing, respect, dignity? I was appalled, and many of us in the media did raise our voices, but by and large, there were these scenes. Even, yesterday when I saw that on TV, the visuals of SPB's funeral, the burial, I saw the kind of, I don't know why this mad frenzy has to take place. Why can't we be more organized? Throughout my stint in the media, I've always told my colleagues, let's not shout and scream. Let's not, behave like there's some kind of a mad rush or a frenzy. But it's not really work. People are what they are. You can't straighten a dog's tail, they say, and that's the way it is. It's very sad. Now, even in the Sridevi case, or even in the Sushant Singh Rajput's case, people must understand that even a person who's deceased can be defamed. The very first explanation to Section 499 IPC on defamation is about the deceased person. If it amounts to defamation, if anything is said to impute anything to a deceased person, as if that imputation would harm the reputation of that person if he was alive. and if it is hurtful to the feelings of his family or near and dear relatives. If only people realize that there is a law on defamation even to protect those who are no more, not there to defend themselves. Then comes my favorite part, the social media, which is a law unto itself. You mention regulation and then you'll get trolled. I have done that. I used to write a column on the social media on the Info earlier before my legal column in the Deccan Chronicle. I wrote a piece on anonymity and trolls, and I was attacked from all sides. They are like, they hunt like wolves in packs. But I must concede, I will be balanced here. I will not completely castigate the social media. I do concede that the social media today occupies a pivotal role in public discourse and public opinion. And it may be called the fifth estate, not the fifth column, but the fifth estate. Because there's a mass clamor for justice often. It augurs well in a democracy. Ideally, the two forms of the media, the social media and the mainstream media, should actually function like a double-barrel gun, if you ask me. But firing solo when disadvantaged by the tyranny of distance, we've seen that in the south or the northeast, Chennai floods, northeast, the migrants issue. Only if there's something that happens in Bombay or Delhi, it's big news. Rest of the country is forgotten. They literally have this condescending attitude, down south, let's see what these guys are doing. Down south. I completely am opposed to this concept, this term, down south. What do you mean down south? You know, the way they are so condescending and patronizing sometimes. However, this downside of the social media cannot be swept under the carpet, because frenzied hashtags, hasty conclusions, and irresponsible speculation during investigation and trial can go against the rule of law. The social media, we must understand, is not a reservoir of expertise. In a marketplace of public perception, buoyed by what I call herd mentality, or the need to sound politically correct, impulse can eclipse reason, particularly during an evolving, sensitive news story. Now, there are scores of handles, if you remember, that came up with hashtags with the name of a minor rape victim, not long ago, very recent. They were oblivious of the prohibition to disclose identity under Section 228A of the IPC. And it was trending. There were those who questioned the names, the change of judges, hearing the Satankulam custodial torture and double murder case. These people were unaware that there is a routine roster change in the Madras High Court every 3 months. It was purely coincident. But rumors rule, and people have no patience for proof today. Then comes the most serious aspect, ladies and gentlemen, of social media, which I think is extremely dangerous, and I'm glad the government, in fact, has taken note of it several times. Anonymity. And anonymity with pseudonyms. It emboldens these abusive Twitter handles. Just imagine having the power to publish a newspaper without a statutory declaration. Now, when you start a newspaper, before you start a newspaper, you need to give a statutory declaration before the magistrate. And what should that declaration contain? It should contain the name and address of the editors responsible for the selection of news. There's press and registration of books act, the name of the printer, the name of the publisher, all that. Without that, you can't start a newspaper. Imagine being able to publish a newspaper. You will publish anything against your enemies and all your foes, right? Whatever you want. Imagine having a mobile phone SIM card without giving proof of identity and address. Today, they even come and take your fingerprints sometimes. A lot of people automatically give away their fingerprints. Pinto said you don't have to. Imagine having weapons, arms, and ammunition without a gun license. Without any licensing, can you have arms and ammunition? But you can have a social media account without having any proof of identity or even your real name or your picture on there. That's why I was very glad that, in the Shreya Singhal case, Shreya Singhal was a law college student. There was an Information Technology Act, there was a draconian provision there which had terms like nuisance. Suppose you tweet something and somebody feels it was annoyance, they get annoyed by your tweet. They could file a complaint, police criminal case against you under Section 66A. 66A was that draconian provision. What happened in Bombay when Bal Thackeray died, his funeral procession was being taken out? Two young college girls, one put out a Facebook post saying, how can the entire city be shut down? Her own view, I would say, legitimate view, nothing wrong. Another friend of us liked that post. Both were detained in the police station under 66A. So then there was this law college student, Shreya Singhal, who went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court struck down 66A as unconstitutional because they said it had a chilling effect on free speech. Now, in its written submissions in that case, the government of India said, I want to read out this particular portion of the government stand. It said any individual today using even a smart mobile phone or a portable computer device can create and publish abusive material and make it available to trillions of people by just one click. Trillions of people, you can mutate, like worse than the coronavirus, it can just mutate. And you can defame people, you can create a communal riot just by irresponsible comments and under the garb of anonymity in the social media. That's a dangerous thing. And I think the social media behemoths have this ostrich tendency. They bury their head in the sand. They must take note of this. I've been writing themes about this in my columns, but so far nothing has been done. Now, the Law Commission of India, in its 200th report, I'm coming back to the media trial, the Law Commission of India in its 200th report had referred to the prejudicial impact on the suspects, accused, witnesses, and even judges. It had cautioned us that even if ultimately the person is acquitted, it may not help the person to rebuild his lost image in society because it is a sped arrow. Unfortunately, whether you like it or not in our society, something good is said about someone, people will take it with a barrel of salt. Say something negative about someone, immediately they will believe it. So anything negative is spontaneously believed. So there was a retired Supreme Court Judge, Justice Swatantra Kumar, who went to the Delhi High Court against Indian Express newspapers and said, and the court opined that coverage can prejudicially affect the public mind, and there's a real and tangible risk of the plaintiff not getting a fair trial. This is a fact that's laid down by the court. Now, what happens? There are other issues now when the suspect's pictures are telecast or published. There could be genuine problems that could arise during identification periods, which is conducted under the Code of Criminal Procedure. Now, remember that Manu Sharma case, better known as the Jessica Lal case. Court observed that the presumption of innocence of an accused should not be destroyed at the very threshold through the process of media trial, and that too when the investigation is pending. Because if the identity of witness is revealed in the media, remember, we don't have a witness protection program in India, unlike other countries. There's no witness protection program in India. In fact, there's a beautiful Hollywood movie called "Don't Look Behind You." I would recommend you watch that movie. It's a beautiful movie about witness protection program. Don't look behind you. Because now, during the lockdown, or even many of us are continuing with our lockdown because we want to play it safe, we are sensible. Good time to watch these movies. So, if the identity of witnesses is revealed in the media, ladies and gentlemen, these witnesses run the risk of coming under pressure. They come under pressure from the accused, the accomplices, or sometimes even the police. And without this witness protection program, they may be forced to retract their versions at the outset or turn hostile later. We know of cases where a media outcry has also led to a retrial and naming of the guilty. So let's give credit where it is due. Give the dog a good name. There have been cases of retrials because of a media outcry when trials were not going well. But there again, as I said, investigate, don't adjudicate. Investigate, don't adjudicate. So is there a way out legally? That's the question that most of us would ask. It's all very well to talk about all this. What do we do? What's the solution? The Law Commission actually came up with a solution. The Law Commission, many of their recommendations gathered dust. The Law Commission had moved in an amendment to the Contempt of Courts Act to have contempt not just from the charge sheet stage, but from the arrest itself. The moment a person is arrested, don't allow the media to speculate on whether he's guilty or not. That is the role of the courts. But if you ask me, I do not entirely agree with this because I don't back for free censorship. Because that could be misused. Free censorship could be misused greatly. Because today, most TV channels, they conduct sting operations. Now, remember that R.K. Anand versus Registrar Delhi High Court, Supreme Court took a balanced view. They said it would be a sad day for the court to employ the media for settling its own house in order. And the media would not relish the idea of being snoopers of the court. And it said that, subject to prior consent or permission of the court would tantamount to free censorship. So actually, the Delhi High Court, Supreme Court rather, agreed with my earlier stand that free censorship is not good. It has a chilling effect on free speech. The court said that, however, a sting that is based on deception would attract the legal restrictions with far greater stringency. Now, I have heard a lot of people arguing, ladies and gentlemen, that media trial is all a creation of, of hypersensitive members of the public and viewers and grey eminences, all kinds of things like that. But they say that it should not affect media trial. Is there fine? Why should the judges get affected? Judges should be made of sterner stuff. They should be above all this. They should be impervious to any criticism. They should just focus on their work. But as Justice Benjamin Cardoza of the US Supreme Court beautifully put, said, the great tides and currents which engulf the rest of men do not turn aside in their course and pass the judges by. So the media has a right, the media has a duty to expose wrongdoing in society. But the media must understand that what's just another story is also someone's reputation at stake. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I am grateful to you for this opportunity and for giving me such a patient hearing. So unlike the TV debates where you can't even finish a sentence, today I finished speaking for half an hour without any interruption. Of course, armed forces veterans are armed forces veterans, and it's so nice to see so many of you smiling and enjoying the speech. I am open. I'm sure many of you have a lot of questions. I'm open to answering all your questions and doubts.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. That was
Thank you, sir.
a really very interesting talk from your side, and some of the takeaways that I can say are one is investigate, don't adjudicate, and then public figures are entitled to their privacy, defaming the deceased, and social media is the fifth column, fifth estate, and it's not a reservoir of expertise. Really, it's been a very interesting talk, and you talked about sensationalizing the news. And this reminds me, this morning when I was going through one of the newspapers, I read that Deepika Padukone was called up by the NCB yesterday, and she surrendered her telephone. Well, in another place I read, NCB confiscated her telephone. So, this difference makes the news more sensational. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, now the floor is open to anyone who wants to ask a question to Mr. Sanjay. If you can kindly either put it in the chat box or raise your hand, we'll have the questions going.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Mohandas, Lalita.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Pinto. And in fact, I wanted to ask you whether in India, the media houses are all only run by our own national agencies, or do we have some stake by foreign agencies also?
Largely by our own national corporations, but there are in some cases there's investment and holding from companies abroad as well, as far as I know.
Okay, but is that in order, or I mean, is it there?
Up to 26% they say, but yeah. See, the problem here is what happens when it comes to national interest in such cases. It's a very pertinent question that you raised. Because, for instance, let's give you a broad example. I mean, I don't know if I have no personal knowledge of any Chinese investments in, let's say, Indian media houses directly. But let's say when you're reporting the coronavirus, let's say if you're investigating, because we all know, in fact, I'm just appalled that there's not even been a speak from the Chinese premier about this coronavirus, much less an apology. Because we are here getting reports that while they lock down internally, they allow flights from their country to go to the rest of the world, and that's how it's spread. Correct. So what happens then if there is investments from a foreign power? In such cases, it's the person who pays the piper calls the tune. So I think that is something that we need to look at in terms of media ownership. Because public opinion is something, creating public opinion is a sacred duty, and we cannot fudge that. So I think there have to be higher stringency when it comes to media ownership. But then we know that many corporates also have huge stakes, controlling stakes in media houses. And what happens when there's corporate fraud? So today, in fact, because of this ownership pattern, objectivity takes a hit.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am. Welcome.
Sanjay, there's a question coming in for you from Rakesh Ori, sir. He says, if there are so many laws for protection, but how can they be used effectively? Today, it's seen that the justice only for the moneyed and the common man is left out. What are your thoughts?
I completely agree with that view. People may call it cynical, but I completely agree with them. That's a fact. That is really a fact. It's been raised, of course, by several sections of society. I, for one, believe that there are plenty of laws, but implementation really is a problem. I gave you the entire list of laws, that constitutional safeguards that are violated by this media trial that goes on. Actually, it should be a case of trial. Media should be on trial for this, rather than trial by the media. The media should be on trial for all this, a violation of our constitutional safeguards. National Broadcasters Association, that's why this body has gone to the Supreme Court and asked for more teeth, because even the Press Council of India is there. But the Press Council of India has no teeth. It's a toothless tiger. So you need a body that can actually, right now you can only censor them, but you can't really take any action against them. So you need some stiff penalties that will really hurt the media houses if they don't fall in line. That is something that we need to push for reforms. I mean, I'm actually quite tempted to write to the Supreme Court to appoint me as amicus in this case, because I've been on both sides of the divide. I've been a part of the media for 15 years, and now as an advocate, I'm an officer of the court. So I can give a perspective on both sides. I think they can frame proper guidelines so that at least a semblance of objectivity can be restored to our media. And I must say one thing. There was another question about regulation. I had given you. There's a question now. Can the August? Problem with the question, it goes on before you could read it. This thing of public interest. A lot of people say this public interest you want to know. Jayalalitha was in the hospital for 75 days. You want to see photos. You want to see how she is exactly. You want to see videos. Now, let's understand that even under the right to Representation of People Act, they ask you for your assets. They ask you for your financial status, any criminal cases pending against you. They don't ask you for your health. They don't ask any person who's going to contest elections, give us your health details. So health is something very private, right? It's something very private. So you can't ask for somebody's hospital admission, somebody's discharged summary and all that. That's the realm of privacy. And a lot of people confuse public curiosity with public interest. Public curiosity is not public interest. Public interest, for that matter, is not all that the public is interested in. Public interest is not what the public is interested in. So these are gray areas, and once this is sorted out, then I think people will have a better perspective.
Okay. Next question is from Wing Commander Arun Kumar. He says, are there any steps to regulate social media in our country?
I dealt with that. In fact, these social media houses have come up only with tokenism. Absolute tokenism. If you try to, there are several things that I find things which are against national interest, against the unity and sovereignty of the country, against communal harmony. And I flag these and I report these posts on Facebook. I will get a standard reply. It does not violate our community standards. Just that. Within a few seconds, some kind of automated thing. It does not violate our community standards. Why can't you have community standards for different geographical locations? What does not violate your community standard in America may violate your community standards in India, for God's sake. Why should they have a common community standard for everyone, and everything that you put comes up with a template response does not violate? Now, I'm glad that question was asked. Now, as a lawyer, I am answerable to the Bar Council. That's a regulatory body. I'm answerable to the Bar Council. Doctors are answerable to the Medical Council. Our Medical Council Commission is a new amendment that's coming up. Advertisers are answerable to the Advertising Standards Council. Banks are answerable to the RBI. Insurance companies are answerable to the Insurance Regulatory Development Authority. Every profession is answerable to somebody. Social media, who's the social media answerable to? No one. Therefore, the onus is on these social media houses to either get their act together or ship out. I think a very clear warning has to be given by the government of India to social media houses. Either you put your safeguards in place or wrap up.
Okay. Next question is for you is from Mrs. Pramila Rajan. Says, can the August court take a sterner role in putting media in its place?
See, the problem is that when courts take suo motu notice of things, like for instance, contempt of court, there's a public outcry. There's a big public outcry, and then sometimes courts are also wittingly or unwittingly, there's pressure on them to be politically correct. So, by and large, taking suo motu action is not the ideal situation. But yes, if the media goes completely out of hand, there has to be somebody who's going to call things to order, right? So I think the court courts are our last bastion of hope. They may come with a lot of flaws. The courts are our last bastion of hope, and we need to. I think as citizens, we need to probably keep filing public interest litigation. We need to keep filing PILs. Any aggrieved citizen. In fact, the Supreme Court in several landmark cases have come up with the doctrine of sufficient interest. So even if you're not directly involved, even if you're not a directly affected party, as a citizen of this country, you have every right. You have that sufficient interest to go to the knock on the doors of the Supreme Court and file a public interest litigation. The court should give you a hearing. Whether this is happening or not, big question. But according to me, you have a right. I think associations like yours that have sacrificed so much for the nation, associations like yours, if they file PILs, you'll be taken more seriously because you come with a lot of credibility. When Wing Commander Bardhaman had spoken about how you just need to tell us the name and people immediately agree to speak. That's because of the credibility that average citizens in this country have enormous respect for the armed forces. The average citizen, good citizens, have enormous respect for the armed forces. So I think if your association can take up issues, file issues in public interest, I am willing to do it for you. Issues in public interest, I will take up issues for your association. And this can be a real takeaway from this webinar.
Thank you, Sanjay. The next question for you is from Captain R. Asylum. He wants to know, how do you envisage a free press when all of them are owned by private persons or organizations all over the world? You will get a loaded news only, isn't it?
Yes. As I said earlier, the person who pays the piper calls the tune. That is why today this concept of crowdfunding. There are a few digital websites, websites that have come up where, like for instance, you have the News Laundry run by Madhu Trehan. There are some good ones which have come up where public actually fund them. Now the thing is, I'll give you a small example, personal example. When I was heading NDTV Hindu, it was a joint venture between NDTV and the Hindu. We were a very responsible family channel. We were the only channel, and I took that much against the views of the marketing team. I always believe that there has to be a Chinese wall between editorial and marketing. But that's no longer, those walls are getting smashed. They're being shattered to smithereens, if you ask me. So we were the only channel which didn't show that Nityananda sex video. I said, because there are children watching our channel. The family is watching the channel with their children. I don't want to show this. Then they said, no, TRPs will go for a toss. I said, let it go for a toss. Okay, but my credibility matters more than my TRPs. And we did so much. In fact, with the people who send us these routine messages, SMSs, WhatsApp, on requests for blood donors. We were the only channel in the world which ran on the ticker requests for blood donation. The only channel. We took up so many issues in public interest. But then what happened? Commercially, it was a failure. The channel had to be sold. Today, it is now Tandi TV. The reincarnation of NDTV Hindu today is Tandi TV. It's not a Tamil channel. It was bought over by the Tandi Group. When that happened, I became so disillusioned that I said, look, that's why I said, content is not king. Masala is the king, queen, and the kingdom. Good content has no viewers. There may be a few people. For instance, you had a very good, you still have it, fortnightly newspaper, tabloid called Madras Musics. Now, fortunately for them, because of Mr. Mutaya's stature and a lot of people like that Madras Musics, it was about heritage and about the city of Chennai. It still had the word Madras. There was a conglomerate of corporate houses which came together and sponsored that. So here, all these corporate people said that, yeah, great, their channel, very good, you're doing very well. When it came to actually putting their money where their words are, nobody came forward. So I was so hurt and upset when NDTV Hindu had to be wrapped up. That's when I said, I'm quitting journalism. I lingered on for a few more months, but then I decided to go into law, which I had studied law before I joined NDTV. I graduated from law in 97. So I went back and I said, look, now I have one foot in the media to the extent of writing columns where I'm independent. But if you ask me today about the current state of the media, I would never go back there. It's really not for people who are subjective or unbiased. I know a lot of very good journalists who are helpless today. So ultimately, you follow the instructions given by your editors there or the owners. Not a journalist. The other day I saw this Deepika Padukone case. this reporter screaming like his Udupi hotel waiter about, oh, Deepika Padukone is going and following the car. I mean, what interest is it to a common viewer? What sense does it make? So I think ownership is very important. And if we don't pay for news, this is what we're going to get. T.N. Session said, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So true even in the media.
Okay. The next question for you is from Commodore Rajaram. He wants to know about the role of the advertisers. He says the government uses ads to influence media. Can private advertisers similarly influence the media?
Oh, yes. See, these are very, very important questions that are being raised. And I think your association can actually be a watchdog, the kind of questions that are being raised. Most governments, in fact, people have gone to court also. Indian Express had gone to court many years ago. See, most newspapers survive, at least a small newspaper, survive solely on government revenue, government ads revenue. So the moment you start getting critical of the ministers and the powers that be, they will stop those ads, first signal. So if you go beyond the point, they will cut off your oxygen that way, and you will not be able to survive. Then you will crawl back to them and say, okay, you carry a few puff pieces and all that. So this is how they control the media. There is control. Private advertisers, big advertisers, oh yes. You find all these jacket ads in newspapers, big ads from builders. How many critical stories have you found about builders and violations and all that today? Big companies, there are so many scams to be exposed. You don't get to see all that. That's because of the ownership. That's because of the ads. So there's very subtle, not just subtle, very direct, open pressure that's being exerted. I know several journalists, very good investigative journalists, and I tell you, the real investigative journalism does not come on. They will claim exclusive, and all that, special investigation, all that. They hype their own work. Real investigation, real investigative journalism is done by the vernacular papers. Small newspapers, small magazines, they are the ones who actually do the real investigation, and there's a lot of copycat journalism going on. People pick up those stories and then play it up on the national media. These guys who are so poorly paid to go the little Jola back there, those are the ones, the real heroes in journalism. These vernacular journalists are the ones who really need to get all those awards, but they are hardly recognized. So this is a reality today.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, any more questions from anyone? Air Marshal Vartman has got a question for you, sir. And after that, Brigadier Sridharan. Sir, Air Marshal Vartman, sir.
Thank you, Harsha. As usual, it's me who is asking the question. And Sanjay, thanks a lot. I read your Justice for All very religiously. And your analysis is pretty good. Sometimes I don't agree with you, but all the same, it's interesting reading, actually. Thank you. And, this trial by television, it used to be there with David Frost, and it's not irregular governmental rules, because I think in those days, even America had good rules, actually. But in spite of it, this trial by television is something like ego trip for the journalist kind of thing. But I've always thought that it is because of the shortcomings of judiciary that media has taken it in its hands to abuse the freedom of speech and want to step in as a platform to deliver justice. And so do you think that the judicial reforms is the primary thing that will have an effect on the media's this liberated freedom of speech and freedom of expression status?
I think you've really touched upon the root of the problem. See, the thing is, there are 4 estates of democracy: the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, and the media, which is called the 4th estate. I, in fact, went to the extent of calling the social media the 5th estate. So whenever there is a vacuum, one of the other estates rushes in to fill in that vacuum, which is probably what is happening today. We do need judicial reforms. For instance, look at the number of judicial vacancies, the judicial delays. In fact, in my column recently, I wrote about Contempt of Courts Act. I said that, look, what really lowers the image of the judiciary in the eyes of the public? It's not really always the case of somebody making a statement, someone's tweet. But judicial delays, if a case goes on for 20 years, 10, 15 years, that shakes the confidence of the common man in the judiciary. So that needs to be addressed. Why is that? For instance, even in Madras High Court, the sanction strength is 75. Now we're going to get 64 with the appointment or elevation of 10 subordinate judges as judges of the High Court. There again, 2 of those 10 judges will retire in 2 years. 4 of those 10 judges will retire in 5 years. So maybe we need to perhaps increase the retirement age of judges, at least in the High Court from 62 to 65, Supreme Court from 65 to 68, so that there are no vacancies filled in. And vacancies, I don't understand this. Vacancies don't come like flash floods. We know somebody's age, we know their date of birth. Before the vacancy arises, why can't they be filled up? So these are, I think, judicial reforms definitely are much needed. And this is perhaps a symptom of judicial lacuna that is showing and playing itself out through this trial by paper.
Or limit the number of adjournments.
I've written about that. In fact, 10 points to limit the number of adjournments, cap on the number of appeals that you can file, so that a case is resolved within a reasonable time limit, within a person's lifetime at least.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Brigadier Sridharan, sir, you may ask your question.
Yeah. Mr. Sanjay, nice hearing your talk. You're
Thank
one
you,
of
sir.
the person who has been in the media as well as in the judiciary. Most of the cases where it is even sub judice, is the media permitted to talk so much? Because when you do sub judice, normally we don't even open our mouth, but you will find media commenting very obliquely, very cautiously, yet they will influence. Isn't the judges going to be influenced by this?
Definitely. See, whatever people say, we will not be influenced and all that. There is, at the end of the day, some element of subjectivity at play there. But as far as the sub judice is concerned, in fact, Dr. Subramanian Swamy had made a very interesting observation once, and I kind of agree with him to a large extent. Where he said this concept of sub judice should not exist in India, because sub judice actually applies to a trial by jury trial. So therefore, you have members of the public who sit there and judge a particular case. So when there's a jury trial, they can get influenced, but a judge should not get influenced. Then the judge also comes from society, and whether you like it or not, people will talk about it while he's having dinner at the dinner table. The family will talk about this case. They'll give their views. So at some level, there is a degree of subjectivity that is at play. That's why I feel that when a case is pending in court, yeah, let it report, let it analyze, let it investigate. But it should stop short of actual adjudication. Because the moment, and even assuming that somebody is acquitted, once your reputation is lost, it is lost forever. I know of cases where people have committed suicide because of media tarring them as a culprit, and later on they get acquitted, and then nobody talks about it. Then entire life is lost. Their entire their professional life will be hit. Their earnings will be hit. The family cannot go and show its face outside. There's so many cases. So I think this thing of prejudging something is a very bad practice, and I don't know how it will end unless there are reforms. I think in the Sudarshan case, TV case, which is pending in the Supreme Court, you have a very erudite judge like Justice Chandrachud, who's among the judges hearing that. I think something might come out, some kind of solution, at least an attempted solution may come out in terms of recommendations by the Supreme Court, which media houses can put in place. I'm a little hopeful. I think something might come out of that judgment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Sanjay, you have a question there's a question for you from Wing Commander Ravi Mani. He
Yes,
says, is a balance possible between individuals' freedom of speech and restraint, particularly in the context of today's electronically connected world? Not unconnected is the fact that people are less informed in depth about most complex subjects, yet feel free to sound off.
See, that is really a big challenge. And in fact, one of my submissions, I said there's a clash and a catch between media freedom and the constitutional safeguards. When we were in school, there used to be this lesson that we were told, A.G. Gardner, an essay on the rule of the road. The freedom to swing my arm ends at the tip of your nose. But what's happening today is that our noses are growing like the fictional character Pinocchio, becoming longer and longer and longer. So you cannot swing your arm, you cannot even lift your arm up. The moment you lift your arm up, people object. On the other hand, people are not content with swinging the arm. Sometimes when it comes to the media, they want a bloodied nose. So this balancing act is something that the constitutional framers had in mind, where they said on the one hand, freedom of speech and expression is not just guaranteed, It's a fundamental right that is not just granted, it is guaranteed. It says other rights are granted, fundamental rights are guaranteed. However, there are 10 reasonable restrictions. Now, are all these restrictions reasonable? Today, people say Contempt of Courts Act is a colonial hangover. Several restrictions on defamation. But I think responsible speech, I think more than free speech, we need to have responsible speech. Because the word free speech can be very misleading for a lot of people. They think free speech means free for all. They don't realize that what you say impacts another person's feelings, reputation, standing in society. So maybe we need to, it needs a constitution amendment if we're going to tinker with that. But I think free speech should be understood as responsible speech. And then you won't really complain about so many reasonable restrictions that there are to it. Everybody forgets the reasonable restrictions. They only talk about free speech. We have free speech. We hold a placard. We go and shout outside. We call names. So this name calling which happens on Twitter and all that, the kind of abuse. People also don't know how to disagree without being disagreeable. People don't know how to have a contrarian view, respect the contrarian view. In fact, Dr. Shobha Vartman said she doesn't agree with some of my views, but she respects it. See, that really is a maturity that you need from an average consumer of news today. You may not agree with everything that I say. As Voltaire said, I disagree with you, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. So if you can disagree without being disagreeable, if you can be mature in your contrarian views, I think that's when we'll have healthy civil public discourse in our society, which is sadly lacking today.
Okay. This last question, I think this is from Major General Jose Manavalan. Was Bhushan's tweet a contempt in your opinion?
I'm actually on the fence here in this because what he stated was, again, there are two aspects to it. One is, of course, he spoke about the Chief Justice sitting on a motorbike on that Harley Davidson without a mask and without a helmet. But then later on, people said you had to look down and see the bike was on the stand. And at that point, he didn't need to wear a helmet. It was not in motion. The other thing he said, when the court has been law, I think what the court really found fault was not with the Chief Justice as an individual, but the Chief Justice as an institution, where where he spoke about the court being under lockdown, but then they also said same thing happened even in Madras High Court when Surya came up with a tweet saying you're asking students to go and write NEET exams, but you are under lockdown. But then there were several judges who also got COVID when they were sitting in open court. So I feel in such cases, whether it was a Prashant Bhushan case or the Surya case, rightly the Supreme Court would give a quietus to that issue. Yes, that 1 rupee fine and all that, as much is being made out of it today. But I think the court could have, ignored it. I feel that the court could have ignored it. See, the problem here is people need to understand that respect is not something that can be commanded always. Respect can come from within. Respect doesn't come with calling somebody my lord or sir or your highness or whatever. So I think there the court could have dispensed, could have kind of steered clear of that controversy and saved time, precious man hours instead of going through all this. And at the end of the day, see what really happened.
Okay, right. Thank you, Sanjay. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Harsha, can I ask another question, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Please go ahead.
I'm asking this as a journalist to you. Like the other day, I was watching a television program on Jaipur dialects, and there was this guy. I saw his curriculum vitae afterwards. He claims to be a film journalist, military journalist, and he's talking about the army sitting on those heights and having taken those heights recently in Galwan. And he's the thing that came to my mind is, hey, dude, why are you telling all these? You're trying to teach the Chinese our mountain combat strategies or what? But it's, I'm sure if I ask any of the army strategists, they'll dismiss it, saying that he's talking through his hat. But as a citizen, it is impacting me. Like if something happens and we don't achieve what we do, then we are so influenced by these journalists and we start questioning our own army. And this is a greater responsibility that the journalists should have when they are commenting on these, when they are not qualified to comment. And surprisingly, this was on a channel run by a ex-bureaucrat who doesn't say a word about his administrative strategies, but he's promoting these kind of loose talk by the journalists who are armchair strategists. The other one is somebody called Abhijit Iyer Mitra, who talks a lot about Air Force and how sometimes good, sometimes bad, but it sort of shapes the thinking of the people of the world, of the country at least. And then they take up arms against, and then the respect of the services goes down. I think, have you got any ideas, or is there any way of telling these guys to shut up, or what?
No, Sanjay, I'll just add to that.
Yes, sir.
You see, the thing is, many things of media you covered, there is also responsible media in terms of what is your responsibility to the nation. There are certain no-go lines, Lakshman Rekha, which should be there. For instance, after the Balakot strike, the chief of air staff, the ministry, the government, and everybody has said that we hit Balakot. Okay, and we bombed it and whatever. And then there is one amateur, satellite analyzer, imagery analyzer in Australia, far away, down under, as I would say, who says they have not hit. And today, and thereafter, the media started quoting that and continuous discussions on that. So actually speaking, it impacts on the citizens of our country that have we really done it? Have we really bombed Balakot, or is there a dispute? Or is there something that we are, the military is lying because of an Australian guy who has said it? So in this, the responsibility of the media comes into the matter, especially when it is to do, I wouldn't say national security, national confidence, the people's confidence in the ultimate weapon which the nation has. So where is that responsibility?
I'll answer the second question first. I think the Balakot strike happened at election times, and therefore several people had their own agendas both within the country and outside. So that was one issue, and I think that fueled a lot of this speculation and all these armchair criticism. See, whether it is covering the arms, I find it very alarming as well as hilarious to note that somebody can be a film journalist and also a defense analyst. These are two extremes. I think when it comes to matters of national security, we need a degree of restraint, and we need to go back to the experts. Journalists are not experts in every field that they cover. In fact, especially in television, see, unlike print journalism, where you have people doing a particular beat, like for instance, in my former news channel, there was Colonel Ajay Shukla, who used to do all these defense stories. Ajay Shukla was in the army, so he understands the army. There is also this concept of embedded journalism. Even during the Kargil war, you had people who went along with the army, and whatever the army wanted to say, they put out. But there were those who went separately on their own with some support or whatever, and they reported whatever they could see. Now here, I think when it comes to reporting sensitive national issues, one is operational details. You cannot pass, I gave the example of 2611, you cannot pass on operational details to the enemy. Therefore, the degree of restraint comes. This is where editors, the role of an editor comes in. An editor is not just to look at the weekly TRP ratings and see, look, why am I not getting ratings? An editor has to, every news channel they have at least 2 editorial meetings a day. They need to look at all these things. So editors need to be more knowledgeable. Even at legal stories, I find a lot of people don't understand the difference between detention and arrest, between police custody and judicial custody. That's why, in fact, at some point, the Supreme Court had suggested that only those with a law degree should do reporting on legal issues. Similarly, I think if people are to report on very sensitive matters of defense and national security, they need to have some grounding. Maybe the armed forces can actually have, I think at some point they were doing it, some kind of refresher orientation courses for journalists to tell them exactly, I know a lot of people don't even know in terms of designation and ranks. They get confused between commander and commando and all that. So I think that basic knowledge is required. Most of it, there are 2 reasons, ma'am, what you would ask. One is lack of knowledge. Second is recklessness. Third, of course, I give you a third reason is to push up TRP. You say something sensational, and things like war and all that kind of excite the nation. This war mongering that goes on. They are not going to send their members of the family to go and fight that war. But there's people who do all this war mongering and all that without any understanding of the rules of warfare, without any understanding of national security. There are these people who should not be allowed to go on air saying all this. The problem with live television is that there is no control. You cannot edit what is live. You cannot control what is live. Therefore, they need to put in stringent codes in place and to have proper training of these people who do live telecast, because it's a huge responsibility. When I used to, my news desk used to call me up in the night and say, okay, tomorrow morning they plan for the day. Sanjay, you address the nation at 8 o'clock, let's say, jocularly. It's a huge responsibility. When you, especially in a national TV channel and today the electronic media, there's huge responsibility. Are we taking that responsibility seriously? I don't think so.
One of the solutions could be, since there is a military operation which is going on against China, would it be appropriate that there is always a news conference where we just give the status whatever the government feels, and it would put all debates to rest,
Need to know basis. Need to know basis.
But the catch in this is that will be debated forever, whatever has been said. You see, in most countries, at least, there is a news. I mean, the government gives its perspective that what is going on and whatever needs to be told to the population. We don't conduct that at all.
See, there are certain unwritten rules and protocol. Like, for instance, even when a leader of an opposition party goes abroad, on international soil, you don't criticize your country.
Correct.
So there is one protocol of that. So similarly, I think we need to evolve some system where the problem is people say, okay, the armed forces, they are all political appointments, and therefore do we take it as gospel truth whatever press release comes out from the defense establishment, or do we have a right to go and probe ourselves? So these are things. But I think at some point, that's why I said national interest should come first, public interest should come first, and there has to be a meeting of minds. I think there has to be, as long as if information that is put out, that is given out, that need to know information is reasonably credible. Credibility has to be built both ways, I feel. Both the media side and as well as the other side is putting out the information. Very often you find the spokespersons hide information, not just with, even with several other government departments. That is why people bypass the spokesperson and go directly to the top brass. And that's how news sometimes is selectively leaked. There are disgruntled elements within every organization who will leak information. There will be people who have contacts. There will be people who will have, children of bureaucrats. There are several ways news gets leaked. There are news stories that are planted. So today, see, the thing is, the whole country is so polarized today that there is also the scope for supari journalism, where people can commission stories to discredit someone, to discredit a government in power, to discredit a political party in the opposition, to discredit a senior officer there. This is a danger that stares us in the face today.
Okay. Well, Sanjay, one last question from my side before we wind up. Now,
Yes, sir.
Most of these newspapers, the national level, they have the legal reporters in the Supreme Court and High Court and all that. And they do a real analysis after a judgment is delivered and, analyze the whole thing. Now, this is one side of what we get in the newspapers, but the other side is this trial by media. Okay, these are two different ends. So are they not sort of contradictory?
See, those who, especially in the Supreme Court, those, especially some of the main national papers, you have some very seasoned people. See, the advantage with print journalism, the reason why print journalism has still got a semblance of credibility left compared to the electronic media, is that in print journalism, you earn your spurs. A person who has covered courts, district courts, goes up to cover the High Court, then he gets transferred to Delhi, or he's based in Delhi, he goes and covers the Supreme Court. There it comes with a certain backing, a certain expertise, and a certain degree of experience with which he holds hope. The problem, so there is a bench strength in a newspaper. So a newspaper will have different beats. Somebody will do only Congress, somebody will cover BJP, somebody will cover defense. The guy who covers defense will go for all the OTA passing out parades. He would have covered several wars. He'll be in touch with senior officers. Many senior officers will take them into confidence. I know of even in the police department during communally sensitive times, the SP will call up the certain journalists and tell them, look, somebody threw a stone at that statue, the nose of the statue broke. I'm telling you, but we're going to take some remedial measures. So they confide in them. So you need to build that rapport so that you can confide in a journalist and tell them, look, this is what happened, but for the sake of the nation, in national interest, there are certain things that can be said, there are certain things that cannot be said. But problem with electronic media is that you have very young people. Now, beyond the point, like you have cabin crew, aircraft, you have retirement age, all that. I mean, there's burnout that sets in. Problem is you have very young people. The news desk is very young. Average age is about between 23 to 30. If you look at any news channel, news desk. So some of them who go on to report these big stories really don't have the bandwidth. And they don't have the guidance also, sufficient guidance needs to be given. There are senior journalists there, but these journalists, because of the nature of the medium, 24 hours, you need to keep filling it up with something or the other, some updates, even if there are no updates. Breaking news every now and then if there is no breaking news. So the nature of the medium lends itself to kind of speculation. I think as far as to take off from Dr. Shobha Vardhaman's point, I think we need to have some amount of expertise and some experience, at least with the sensitive beats. What are the sensitive beats? Defense, health, home ministry, law and order. These are three sensitive beats where you can have some amount of experience, which media organizations can themselves lay down. It has to be self-regulated.
Right. Thank you, Sanjay. It's been a wonderful morning. Now,
Thank you, sir.
It's back to Air Marshal Vardhaman for the winding up. Back to you, sir.
Sanjay, I think it was a really, what do I say, thought-provoking, very informative and a brilliant talk, Sanjay.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Your debating skills and your oratory skills are to the fore, and you were just quoting the things so beautifully. Brilliant talk. Thank you. And in fact, the interactive session I thought was outstanding. I think
very good questions that were asked, sir. Absolutely, very soul-searching questions, I would say, and very pertinent questions.
Yeah, so the old brains do think,
Absolutely, absolutely.
Of course,
that's why they say gray eminences.
Gray eminences, yes. No, you see, the thing is, the gray starts thinking more about the nation when
Yes.
things have gone by, and now we are left to just sit and watch and hope like hell these things get.
I, for one, in fact, that's why I made sure that I was here well before, well on time, because some of these old school values are so lost today. If only we can have those old school values back in our curriculum in schools and colleges. People, this punctuality, people showing up at time. We started, I noticed, on the dot at 11 o'clock. That's the kind of discipline that we really need in our society. The only discipline that we have in TV channel is that they are very punctual, as in commercial break will be taken at the right time.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
You're talking of discipline and the indoctrination or whatever, the training that we go through. In some of your writings, you could take up the wonderful work the National Cadet Corps does,
Yes.
And it does immense service, but very few people know about it. Very few report on it. And there are such success stories, especially in Tamil Nadu. Our boys and girls have excelled in the NCC at a national level. This is at a side actually.
I was in the road safety patrol in school, and in college I was in the NCC for a few months. Then I found that it was the training was very rigorous, and some of the things they told me, you have to cut your hair very short and almost certain things, and then the commanders were like trying to bully us. Certain things I'm a little far too independent for that, so somehow it didn't suit me. So I left the NCC, but I had a good time while I was in the NCC. I really had a good time, and many of my classmates, come from defense backgrounds. I don't know if you know, one of my classmates, his father was, I think, Air Marshal Mandodi, who was in Chennai for a while. So I was also been greatly influenced by a lot of the discipline that the armed forces, the families, the children who come from armed forces backgrounds, that's always been something that I've looked up to. And talking about NCC, the first TV program that I did was on Doordarshan, where I interviewed cadets who had, from NCC in Chennai who had gone for the RT parade.
Okay.
So that's again, a moment of nostalgia.
Yes.
Yes, Air Marshal Mandodi was a logistics officer.
Okay.
Right.
I think he was in Chennai or something for a short while, so because his son was studying with me in Loyola.
Yes.
Okay.
So his son is an N-32 pilot.
Oh, right. Okay.
Jayarajan is saying something, but he's muted.
I also thank you for the offer that you've given us to take up matters which we as an association can do. Thank you very much. We'll definitely keep that in mind. And as and when we have some things coming up and it works our mind up, definitely we'll take your offer and we'll come in touch with you.
Living well.
And
you can give a magistrate for that.
okay. That I think I leave it to Mr. Sivasailam, who could talk to you on the matter of living will, which we have taken up, and the problem that there is in terms of certifying the living will. It seems, as per the law that there is, only a district magistrate can certify it, and he'll go bonkers signing thousands of living wills, So how to simplify it? I leave it to Mr. I think Mr. Sivasailam is here, and maybe you could get in touch with.
See, this
Sanjay.
is based on the 2018 judgment in the common causes case in Supreme Court, the living will. We are going deep into it. We had a last session on this. There is a procedural bottleneck. Every living will has got to be sworn before the judicial magistrate first class. That is going to be a big bother. People of our age and going personally and doing that. In fact, our suggestion is to get this notarized like the normal will, which need not be registered even.
Yes, it's just simple handwritten on a piece of paper.
Yeah, it's a simple statement, your own testimony, that's all. Yes. But here they've introduced this because there is no legislation, unfortunately, on the living will, even though the Supreme Court had recommended legislation to be brought in shortly, but it has not come. But the procedure we want to, I will talk to you separately on this. So your help may be required.
Sure.
If
required, you can think of a public interest litigation on this.
Yes, if required, we may have to file a PLI so that the provisions can be amplified to suit our requirements.
Yes, you need to give a representation to the authorities first. Wait for about a month and then file a writ petition, public interest litigation.
I will discuss with you separately about this.
Sure.
Okay, right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanjay Pinto. Wonderful talk, enlightening, thought-provoking,